So let's say you've come into a store, you're thinking about buying a katana, you just want to show that you have the right etiquette, the right understanding, you don't want to look like a noob. This is for you. So you've come into a store and it's like, I want to see that katana. May I see that katana? Don't reach for that katana. Someone's going to pass it to you. It's not cool to reach for one. Just saying. So it's been passed to you. So I want to pop the scabbard off and I want to remove the scabbard from the sword. I don't want to do the reverse because when we're doing EI, we're removing the sword from the scabbard. We're cutting it. At this point, I want to remove the scabbard from the sword to show that I am just inspecting it. Now, I want to touch it. I want to know how sharp it is. I just want to touch it. Everyone does. Everyone does. I feel that this is a trap every human falls for. Don't touch it. Cloth you can use, or you can drop it on something clothed. Specifically here, I'm not going to drop it like this. So we're going to just talk as a caveat for a moment, which we'll get into greater detail later. This side, the back, the mune, and that side, those three faces are all burnished. So that means they've taken a piece of steel and they've burnished it. You push down the tall parts of the steel and it gives a different finish and it closes off the pores, unlike the cutting edge. When we draw, the mune touches the back of our hand. When we have techniques, our hands will only ever interact with the burnished steel. So with that stated, when we're looking at it, slight angles, you're going to hold it onto a sleeve and make sure that there's no one around. Best case scenario, keep the kisaki, the tip, right onto your wrist. So as I'm moving around, if you're in a store, if you're looking at someone that is selling you swords and you're moving around a lot, you're going to make them nervous. This keeps everyone happy. This keeps everyone safe. We can look at the sword. Now, what are we looking for within a katana? Now, of course, first of all, you got to figure out what your price range is, and you're looking at within your price range. What I would suggest, first of all, we're going to look for, do we have differentially treated steel? That means that edge is very hard steel, and just behind it is not. It is the softer part of an already strong steel. How many edges does it have? Is it a face, and then you can see another face that goes up to the cutting edge? They have their place in the world, but they have their place. We've got two faces coming to that cutting edge, so that is a live steel edge. That's great. Just a side note, the polish on this one is still a work in polish. You're going to look down the edge, you center the back, the mune, and the tip of the saki, the very tip, and look down it. See if that creates a straight line. Reverse that same look, and you're just picking the closest part of the ha, that's the cutting edge of the sword, and you just line it up. Oh, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous practice. Just go and look at swords, and you can see the craftsmanship that's involved in this. Another aspect is you're going to grab that into a reflection, and you want to, whatever you want to call this movement, and you just play with the shadow across the edge. So we've looked at it. We want to return it. The scabbard goes. I'm not going to use my right hand for any of this. This hand comes up, drops it in the scabbard, and then I slide that back on. Martial artists are always going to have their thumb on the tsuba. Your thumb should always be on the tsuba. In these moments, they're rarely not, because we're not using them. The reason for this is the habaki and the koiguchi need to be correctly mated. And if we have a correct smash, if we have a correct, I don't like it. So we always leave a thumb. Other side note, the sageo, this cord, really disturbs how they should be presented. A stand usually will be made specifically for the katana, Because if we look at this one in its current display, it's not centered. That's not cool. Another really important thing to look for, which I'm just going to throw it here, is you're going to look down the line of the katana. You want something that's really pretty. The curvature that you see on the far side of the saya should be mimicked in the suka. Many of the modern ones, including this one, it straightens out. I make a silly face because I feel it should have that same curvature aesthetically, but functionally. When you're holding that curvature, not holding just a straight stick. So we've looked at the sword and we think it's a nice sword, but can we go a step further? I'd like to see it broken down. If a katana cannot be broken down, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad katana or a cheap katana. It just means that it wasn't made with as much time and craftsmanship. So you're probably going to have a price reduction. It's really a play for, it's a play for what you want. Again, we come up with the budgets that we're looking for and we work with that. Cleaning kit, I'm looking for this hammer, which isn't in this box. We take our sword and I want to remove it again. So I pop the scabbard, pull the scabbard off, put that to the side. Now, I need to pop the makugi. And then there will be 2 makugi in all modern katana. The old katana of the day would not have 2. They would have 1. But this is a safety feature. Side note, who knows this? So this is the little hammer that we have. And this center portion here comes off, and that adds as a little center punch that if the makugi are too tight and you can't push them out easily, you can just use that center punch, which I get to do here. Just pop that out nicely. The really great ones, you'll see someone, they'll pop the makugi out, and they'll go, and they smack down on their hand, and it loosens it. Yeah, not on mine. It doesn't do that. So I'm going to grab the tsuka quite well, and just like I would remove the scabbard, I'm going to pop it with my thumb, and that loosens it. I'm going to remove, really, the seppa down from the tsuka. I'm going to put that to the side, which means now easily I can come down, loosen, and now I can take tsuba, the extra seppa, and the habaki. Now I can examine the full katana. Now, this is the fun part for everyone that's told that we're not allowed to touch the blade, because we're not. Only the blacksmith and the polisher are allowed to touch the blade. Then the kago, the tang, that's a completely different story. So we can look at this, now that we have this apart. This is where we will find our signature. Okay, I'm putting this aside. We're going to look at the parts for a moment. The fushira and koshira are the furniture of your tsuka. The tsuka is the handle. The ito specifically is the wrap, the cord, the string. The itomake is the wrapping. And then we've got our decorative menuki. Well, I show them menuki here. Oh, and underneath, this is same. This is ray skin. It's just small little sleeves, slivers. I don't know what word that would be. Next, seppa. These are brass. These are the little washers that go between the tsuba and the habaki and the tsuka. But they sandwich the tsuba. This is the tsuba. The tsuba is a handguard. But unlike many swords, though it can stop a sword, the idea of this tsuba is more for the part of stopping your hand from traveling up that blade. Tsuba. This is a simple iron tsuba. The tsuba, putting aside all the katana, in itself is its own artwork. Of course, as is every other piece here. And then habaki. This one piece. Despite all of the reasons that the katana is its own sword apart from any other sword, this little piece is one of the largest factors of why this sword is different than every other sword. This little habaki, we can translate that into a collar. The idea is this collar is what holds the sword into the scabbard. So the sword's so amazing. The aspect, oh, that's gonna, it's also meant to hold really well and not fall out. I'll figure that out. The katana, the ha, this cutting edge is the main thing that stands. There's so many things. Another aspect of what makes this stand out, having the hardened steel edge and that softer back, giving that little bit of flex, which makes a sword last a whole lot longer. Maintenance of your sword. A maintenance kit really comprises of a simple selection of your hammer, a little bit of oil. In this case, I'm using a simple mineral oil I buy from the pharmacy, and I add in peppermint oil. It's still an antiseptic, but I like the smell better than clove. The little powder poof. So this contains, well, scratchy dust. I do not know what type of scratchy dust it uses, but it uses a very fine scratchy dust. The idea is when you powder the sword, and with a little bit of rice paper, you're going to go over that edge, and that's going to remove any of the gunk. Now, I use a mineral oil, which has a large shelf life. It doesn't go rancid easily. A traditional oil will go rancid, not easily, just over time. That's just part and parcel of life. We all die. And this puts out a lot of dust. So that's more than enough for that entire blade. Then, with my piece of paper, I have two sides, and specifically, just like when we draw, this thumb is really important here. I'm going to hold that back of the mune so I can touch the entire blade in one even motion. There's stories of some samurai that would every morning clean their sword of 1,000 strokes. I think that's nonsense because you'd really mess up your polish. I would more believe that a samurai would do 1,000 cuts more than 1,000 cleans. There's the gunk. Can we see the gunk? Gunk. Now reverse hands, reverse grip. And we have the old oil. Now with my little dropper, take two pieces off first, not just one. One is for cleaning, the second one is for oiling. You want to put a small amount of oil on and then massage it or kind of buff it into the steel. We massage that oil into all of those little grooves. Now I'm pointing out here, well, it's not on camera, that I am going slow and controlled. I am pushing on the back of that blade, on the side of that blade, on the non-cutting edge of that blade. This is meant to cut on the pull. So be very careful. This is where you cut yourself. You're all relaxed. You're spending time with your sword. You want to clean it. And then maybe something happens and you're like, oh. And that's, you've done it. You've sliced your fingers open. Now with all of that cleaned, oiled, ready to go, I want to put this all back together. So blade in hand, habaki, push up in place, hold it with your fingers. The seppa that looks after the habaki, the suba, most subas have an orientation. Most orientations are noted. I made this one, so it's not. Next seppa. Sometimes the fushida, or is that the koshida? The top piece of furniture does come loose. Then, for the most part, and then you're laughing. The makugi do have specific spots. And then I like to use the little cap of the hammer, because then I can push that final bit of the makugi into place. And with that, the sword is done. Thumb stays on it, finger stays on it. I find the place in my belt, push it through, finger comes onto the tsubo. There we go. Let me see that. Whoop. The tsuba, most commonly, is going to be right in the center line. With that statement, as you can see, we've got benches here. If I do that, I can smash that table really easily. So in many cases, when walking, a sword's going to be held straight, unless you want to cause shit and like start knocking people's swords. Your sageo. And we've got 2 loops. And the loops follow all the way through. So when I pull this one, now this side's loose, almost entirely. I pull this one, now everything is loose. And these are all just slip knots. So it's going to be downward. So the first is we cross. I'm going to do the front first. It's so simple. Put your finger in the way, wrap behind, grab the little loop, and just tighten it over your thumb. And then follow the same. Tighten over your thumb. Tighten over your thumb. So it's not too tight. Then this piece just folds over, and we're going to hold it through. We're going to thread it through. Just let that sit loose for a moment. That's going to be tightened, but we need to do this side first. We hold these because it's really easy to lose those knots, as this is all just a simple slip knot. We want to keep these pretty tight because this sageo specifically is, I feel, on the shorter side of things. And I'll need to tighten up all these knots to get it to look how I want it to look in the end. Now, some of us find it easier if you just pop in a little bit of cursing every once in a while. It just seems to thread faster. But that's kind of a personal preference. So in this case, the bottom is going onto the top portion of this. It's important because on this side, it has to come out underneath. Now, each side is just peeking through, not even on this side anymore. So now I'm going to come through and tighten all of these up. If you have a nice silk sageo with a lot of color, the braid upon them is so pretty. They have a lot of poof. So you don't want to tighten them as much as like this tight that has a very tight braiding already. I feel like the tight braiding looks good on a tight braided rope. A loose braiding, and loose isn't the right word, but it's definitely looser than this because the puffiness, you see those old touch, they're just gorgeous. You kind of want, not a full bunny ear, but you need to have some sticking out of the side. And then we just want to have symmetry, because if we don't have symmetry, what do we have? Nonsense. Other ninjas going to be making fun of you because your sageo looks awkward. It's just uncomfortable for everyone. Just easier to have a good looking knot. Here we go. There's the knot back again. Another use for the sageo, or maybe the simplest, is you're traveling. You want to wear it on your back. And since it's the same knot as that you'd use to hold your sleeves back in a nice set of kimono, it's really simple to do. So just take one side, a little bit in your mouth. Just wraps around the back of the scabbard, holding from the kurikata. And then this knot is just a simple bow knot. So you can do whatever knot you wanted, whatever you're comfortable with. And now I can travel easily with that sword with the sageo. No, on the point of drawing techniques, so I need to make sure that I can hold on to the scabbard just to pull it slightly to be able to draw that sword. And same to return it, much like when you use it on your belt. Just in this case, you have to look at it. The drawing of the sword. As I want to pop the hibaki from the saya, that's it. That happens at the same time when that hand comes up, and now I draw the sword. As we spoke earlier, it draws off of the mune, draws down. The back again, it's really easy. These two fingers are going to do it. So we said earlier, but we get to touch this part. And you just guide it through till it falls into its place. I'm going to use my thumb for this reference. That little click. And now the objective is to take the scabbard, the saya, and match whatever angle of your blade is, so it follows the mune. It's always traveling along its mune. Now that is just simply, we were just talking about simply removing it from the saya and returning it to the saya. Now for the actual cut. Now it's the intention of what's happening. I won't even slow down to make the point of slowing down. You look at the best cutters, the best kenjutsu practitioners. When they do their taimeshigiri, you might as well describe them as slow. It's more as if their mind just... and the mats stay in place, or maybe just fall off. The noobs, they want to go as quick as possible. And you see the tatami, and it flies off to the side. It's like you had all that extra energy built up in your katana, but instead of having it behind the cutting edge, you had it to one side or the other because your grip wasn't strong, because you were focusing on speed. So please, when you practice, practice slowly thousands of times, and then just surprise yourself with how fast you actually are. So we grab the suka, we pop, we remove, bring along, we open our chest, but our mind, our thoughts, our energy, it's all here. The kisaki. This is where we're cutting with. This is the part. Now, of course, we're traveling through, and depending on what you're cutting, you're going to be using different parts of the sword. But for the practice, for the understanding, live in the kisaki, build the energy through this entire blade. So when it is brought across its target, it is cutting. Caveat, many schools will talk of different ways to hold the scabbard. They'll talk of different ways of moving the feet, how close they should be, how high your elbows should be, how more you're leaned forward, how less you're leaned. There will be a myriad of decisions to make through each individual part of this practice. The only part I want to specify right now is the important aspects of it follows the mune, it exits the scabbard, it chooses an orientation, it cuts across that target. And for aesthetics, as this is the eye, add a chiburi, something, a shake of the blood. And then bring it back into place, return. That's the important aspects of this. That is the cut. Practice it thousands of times. Let's take a look at the first customary bow that would begin a class. Now, importance here is that the handle is on my left side, not the dangerous side. And the blade is facing me. And just adding one more note. This is a katana that is just on the floor in the dojo. Never, or to whomever owns that sword, will be quite unhappy. And if it's your own sword, same rule applies. You never step over it. Also, if this is on the ground, I cannot be like this and just reach down for my sword. It's poor manners. You take a knee to grab that sword. Blacksmith has its now box of steel. It needs to be separated to what types of carbon it is, but first it needs to be squished. And this is where the easiest of separating it is. So they put it into the forge they have special tongs that hold onto these rocks. So then that is hammered down into these little flat discs. And each time they're putting water onto the anvil and onto their hammer, because that's cleaning out the impurities, the slag. The steel is being cleaned already at this part. That is also the process of getting it ready for forge welding. Then they're broken up. All of these pieces, we've got the high steel in one area, the low steel on the other area. In both cases, they're going to take a handle, and it's going to be a low steel, and they forge a little plate. And this is the real magic. Now, all of these we've got a pile of these broken little crystalline structures, and they're puzzle pieced ever so special across this, what looks like roughly the size of a building brick. And once that's all together, they very carefully wrap it in it's a rice paper, but a thick paper. Then they cover it with clay, and then they cover it with a straw ash. Now, the idea is here that this brick will sit into the furnace under immense heat, and it all needs to come up to a welding temperature, which I might as well say is a boiling temperature, because the inside of that is eventually going to go liquefied. Like just before liquid, but liquid. And because of that extra heat, we're going to be burning off and losing the carbon content through every bit of the heating. So covering it in clay, one, you can hold the heat longer, you're covering it with more carbon, and then you're adding the ash, which is adding even more carbon to this pot of steel. And now the forge welding is begun. Now, it's very slow at the beginning. Now, the first few heats from the hammer are really quite soft, and the steel is so sticky at that point, but it is almost liquid. If you give that too much force, and it's going to make a big mess, and it's going to burn everything. And once the steel is solidified, it's one. When it gets clay covered, they're dunking it and rolling it in the straw. It's already one piece of steel, and it's still this slag. Now the hammer hits are becoming much stronger. So fast forward, this is done same process for the high steel to the low steel. The only difference here now is for the high steel, you're going to make a hot dog bun. And for the low carbon steel, you're going to make the hot dog. So now that we've got the hot dog bun and then the hot dog, now that also gets covered and forge welded together to get this mass of now one composite of steel. Now it gets to the point of making, I think it's tsunate. I should just stick to English because it's easy. Now this is just the blank, and you draw out the steel, and it's just a rectangular billet. You're making sure that you've got the right taper going to both ends, and that the tip of the sword specifically, it comes up on a 45-degree angle to the cutting face at this point in the forging process. Each time we're still putting the water onto the anvil, which means we're losing more and more of the impurities with every single heat. Keeps things pretty clean, and it's a fun effect when it's going on. Now we'll say it's fun. It's where we want it. Now probably the power hammer has stopped and the apprentices have stopped. Now the smith themselves will be working on bringing out the quality of the blade. So first of all, The edge will be placed onto the anvil and you hammer accordingly. And that will also produce, because you're squishing this part of the steel, you're also slightly squishing the back of the steel, but you're not squishing it at the same degree. And because it's not the same degree, what slowly starts to happen, that what was a straight billet just starts to give that wonderful first bits of a curve of what we understand as a katana. The rest of that curve comes in later, but specifically, you have to have that even distribution of steel, have the taper just as you want it, because it's already really understood, at least from the master, of how much curve you're going to gain into the heat treat. But let's not go too far just yet. We've got the blade. Let's get it down to the kisaki, the cutting tip of the sword. It's angled out to the front currently. And the idea is now this is hammered back to create the kisaki. Now the clay goes on. We're ready for the forge. There's a special charcoal used for the forge. The forge is going to function a little hotter. And they're going to heat it by the back of the blade. Now it's the sharp edge that gets the hardest, but they still want to make sure that it's completely even. And waiting for this to get up to 800 degrees Celsius. It has to get to like 803, maybe 700. It's a very specific range. And if it does not get to that range, it doesn't create the different type of steel. When it comes time, they bring it just past that heat. For the most part, you'll see them, they'll just hold it above the water for a moment before. Now, this is really specific. It has to enter evenly. Even the slightest angle, this side's going to cool faster and it's going to warp like a son of a. So, and it only will drop to this part of the tang, because the handle needs to stay soft because it still needs to be drilled inside. So now that's done. That thermal shift that happens, there's that expansion, then there's the retraction, and as the sword now, as it's cooling, curves into that final shape, which will pop off the last of the clay. We're almost there. And this is the simplified version. Then it goes to the polisher. This book is on, this gives most of the forging and a little shout out to all the little individual bits. This one is specifically just for polishing. And it is an art in itself. The masters, my God, man. The forge, the smith will do the first polish. Got to make sure that you're handing something that's got the right angles and shapes and curves as you want it. But that is just the rough. Then it goes to the polisher that will spend a week to a month. They can do a regular katana in a week. It's stunning. So they spend a lot of time polishing. Now, specifically, these edges, they're not like pyramid. They're considered an apple seed, so there's a bit of roundness. That gives them, well, unparalleled cutting. But it's also considered polishing. You don't sharpen a katana, you polish a katana. All of these faces are polished, and at the beginning, all of them are polished to the same degree, and then it changes. The back, which we spoke of earlier, is burnished, and the sides are burnished, because these are the areas we touch. As we sheath our sword, it draws upon our hand, and in certain kata, we hold, and you see where the thumb is always really small. You never see it where it goes down. One, it's going to be over the blade, but two, it's that nice small, so you're only ever touching the burnished area, as that area is very unlikely to rust, because as we polish, you make mountains and valleys. The higher the grit, the lower the mountains, but burnishing pushes over those mountains and it seals off the steel. The fine polish at the blade is what keeps the rust not happening on the blade, but of course they're always oiled. And that is my quick understanding of how they put the swords together. So when we look at the modern swords, the technology is amazing for what it gives us, but the artistry that comes from these historical tools just can't be surpassed. Yeah, okay. Well, that is my talk on the katana, though I think all of them are my favorite tools. This is definitely my favorite tool of all times. It's not one that I've made. On a personal note, I want to be able to make my own katana, but I look forward to the day to be able to travel to Japan and pick up my own Nihonto from Bizen province. Dreams. I need to get outside. I feel I'm like wasting time at this point. It's time for my own practice. Okay, bye.